Kale Silverleaf walked through the busy halls of Nexus Station Harmony, carrying a box of medical supplies under his arm. The metal walls hummed with energy from the massive engines that kept the station spinning in space around a distant neutron. Star people moved past him like he was invisible, which was fine by him after 3 years of working as a deliverer. Runner, his pointed ears marked him as an elf, but nobody seemed to care about that either. The humans barely looked at him, and the alien crew members treated him like part of the furniture most days. He preferred it this way. Being noticed usually meant getting blamed for something. The morning shift had started an hour ago, and already the corridors buzzed with activity. Commander Lisa Torres stood near the main viewport, giving orders to a group of security officers. Her voice carried authority that made everyone stop and listen when she spoke. Kale had delivered reports to her office many times, but she never seemed to remember his name or face. He turned down a side corridor toward the medical bay where Dr. Maya Patel worked. The doctor was one of the few people who actually said thank you when he brought supplies. She had kind eyes and always asked how his day was going, even though she probably forgot his answer. 5 minutes later, the medical bay doors slid open with a soft hiss. Dr. Patel looked up from her workstation, where she was examining some kind of strange purple plant sample. Her dark hair was pulled back, and she wore the standard blue medical uniform of the station. "Good morning, Kale," she said with a smile. "I was hoping those cultures would arrive today." Kale set the box on her desk. "The samples are in the temperature-controlled container. The rest is standard medical supplies." "Thank you," Dr. Patel opened the box and began checking the contents. "You know, I always wonder what it must be like for you walking around the station all day, seeing everything that goes on." Kale shrugged. "Most people do not notice me, so I see plenty. That must give you an interesting perspective on things," she said while logging the supplies into her computer. Before Kale could answer, an alarm chimed softly. Dr. Patel frowned at her screen. "Something strange here. The environmental sensors in Section 7 are showing unusual readings." "What kind of readings?" Kale asked. "Energy fluctuations that do not match any known patterns." Dr. Patel pulled up a display showing wavy lines of data. "It started about an hour ago, but engineering says all systems are normal." Kale had walked through Section 7 that morning and remembered feeling a strange vibration in the floor plates. The lights had also seemed dimmer than usual, but he had not thought much about it. Felt something odd in that area earlier this morning. He said the floor seemed to shake slightly. Patel looked at him with interest. "Really? When exactly?" "Around 7:30 when I was delivering reports to the administrative offices." She made a note on her computer. "I should probably mention this to Commander Torres. Environmental anomalies can be serious on a space station." Kale left the medical bay and continued his rounds. The next stop was the security office where Zara worked. The Alverian woman stood nearly 7 feet tall with bright blue skin and 4 muscular arms. Her people were known as warriors, and she had quickly become the head of station security. Despite being only 25 years old, the security office was always busy. Zara stood at a large table studying patrol schedules, while several human and alien officers worked at computer terminals around the room. Her 4 arms moved independently as she pointed to different areas on a holographic map of the station. Kale waited by the door until one of the human officers noticed him. "Package delivery for Chief Zara," he said. The officer took the package without really looking at Kale. "Just leave it on the side table." Kale could hear Zara talking to her team about increasing patrols in the outer sections, something about unusual reports from maintenance crews. The Alverian security chief had sharp instincts and took even small problems seriously. Next was the communications center where Nix handled all the interstellar messages. The Syrian was barely 4 feet tall, with large violet eyes and pale silver skin. Her people were telepathic, but station regulations required her to use normal communication equipment when dealing with other species. Nix sat at a complex console, surrounded by multiple screens, showing star charts and communication channels. Her delicate fingers moved quickly across the controls as she managed dozens of conversations, happening across light years of space data crystals for the communication logs, Kale said as he approached her. Station X looked up and smiled. Thank you, Kale. Her voice was soft and musical like most Syrians. We have been very busy today. Many ships are changing their routes for some reason. Why are they changing routes? I'm not sure. Most captains just say they have received new orders from their companies. But it seems strange that so many would change course at the same time. Kale thought about this as he left the communications center. Pattern changes usually meant something big was happening in space, but he was just a delivery worker who would care about his opinion. His last major stop was the engineering section where Vera maintained the station's power systems. The Quartzian engineer looked like she was made of living crystal with a body that reflected light in rainbow patterns. Her people were master technicians who could interface directly with computer systems. Vera stood inside the main reactor chamber wearing protective gear while streams of data flowed across multiple holographic displays. Her crystalline body glowed softly in the blue light of the quantum reactor's replacement components for the secondary power grid. Kale called out. Vera turned toward him, her faceted features catching the light. Set them by the tool station, please. I will install them during the next maintenance cycle. Is everything running normally? Kale asked. Define normal, Vera said with what might have been humor. Power consumption has increased by 2% over the last 6 hours with no explanation. The computer says all systems are operating within acceptable parameters, but something is drawing extra energy. Kale left engineering feeling troubled. Small problems had been appearing all morning. Strange energy readings, unusual vibrations, ships changing course, and now unexplained power drain. Each issue seemed minor by itself, but together they formed a pattern that made him uneasy. His final delivery of the morning was to the Central Command Center, a sealed package marked urgent for Commander Torres. The command center sat at the heart of the station, surrounded by layers of security and armor. 2 security guards checked his identification before allowing him into the main command room. The center featured a huge holographic display showing the space around the station, along with dozens of smaller screens, monitoring everything from life support to defensive systems. Commander Torres stood with her back to the door, talking quietly with Captain Amy Rodriguez, who had arrived that morning with a supply shipment. The two women were discussing something that seemed to worry them both. Kyle cleared his throat softly. Commander Torres, I have an urgent package for you. Torres turned around. Her face showed the stress of command, but she managed a professional smile. Thank you, just set it on my desk. As Kale placed the package down, he caught fragments of their conversation. The intelligence reports are vague, Rodriguez was saying, but something big is moving in dark spaceships that do not match any known configuration. How reliable is this information? Torres asked. Reliable enough that 3 different trading companies have rerouted their fleets away from this sector in the last 12 hours. Torres opened the package Kale had delivered and scanned the contents quickly. Her expression grew more serious. Another confirmation. The diplomatic vessel will arrive tomorrow morning with a delegation from something called the Void Hegemon. Ever heard of them? Rodriguez said. Neither has anyone else, Torres replied. That is what worries me. Kale finished his delivery and left the command center, but the conversation stayed with him. Unknown ships in dark space, multiple companies, changing routes, and now a mysterious diplomatic mission from a group nobody had heard of before. The rest of his shift passed quietly as he delivered smaller packages and messages around the station, but everywhere he went, Kale noticed the same patterns, small problems and strange readings that individually meant nothing but together suggested something was wrong. By the end of the day, he had counted 7 different departments reporting minor anomalies. The environmental systems showed unexplained energy fluctuations. The communication arrays detected faint signals from empty space. The security sensors picked up movement in areas that should have been empty. The power grid drew more energy than it should have needed. Kale tried mentioning these observations to his supervisor, but got the usual response: just focus on your deliveries, and let the experts handle the technical stuff. As evening came, Kale returned to his small quarters in the lower sections of the station. Through his small viewport he could see stars scattered across the darkness of space. Tomorrow would bring the mysterious diplomatic vessel, and whatever secrets it carried, he had learned long ago that being invisible had advantages. People said things around him they would never say to someone they considered important, but sometimes being invisible also meant nobody listened when you tried to warn them about danger. Kale settled into his narrow bunk and tried to sleep, but something deep in his elven instincts told him that tomorrow would change everything on Nexus Station Harmony. The diplomatic vessel arrived exactly when predicted, but it looked nothing like any ship Kale had seen before. The hull appeared to absorb light rather than reflect it, making the vessel seem like a hole cut out of space itself. Even through the station windows, it hurt to look at directly. Kale watched from an observation deck as the dark ship docked with the main bay. The vessel moved with unnatural silence and grace, as if it was floating through water instead of vacuum. When the docking clamps engaged, there was no vibration or sound that usually came with ship arrivals. Commander Torres had called for increased security, and Dr. Patel prepared the medical bay for the alien delegation, but nobody seemed to know what to expect from beings that called themselves the Void. Hegemony. The delegation consisted of 3 figures that looked like living shadows with glowing eyes that shifted from red to purple to blue. Their bodies seemed to flow and change shape as they moved, making it impossible to tell where one being ended and another began. They wore no visible clothing or equipment, and left no footprints on the station floor. Scale was assigned to help with refreshments for the diplomatic reception. His supervisor handed him a cart loaded with various foods and drinks that might appeal to different alien species, though he wondered what shadow beings would eat. The reception took place in the main conference room where Commander Torres waited with her senior staff. Dr. Patel stood ready with medical scanning equipment, while Zara positioned security teams at every entrance. Nix monitored all communications, and Vera kept watch on the station's systems. As Kale wheeled the refreshment cart into the room, he noticed the temperature had dropped several degrees. The lights also seemed dimmer, even though they were set to full brightness. The shadow beings glided into the room, and the effect became more pronounced. "We greet you, Commander Torres," one of the shadows spoke, though Kale could not see a mouth or determine which one was talking. "We come from the space between stars, seeking new connections with the peoples of this galaxy." Commander Torres stepped forward. "Welcome to Nexus Station Harmony. We hope this meeting will begin a beneficial relationship between our peoples." Kale began setting up the refreshments, but kept watching the strange visitors. Something about them made his elven instincts scream warnings. Even though they spoke politely and made no threatening moves, every part of his being wanted to run away from them. Dar Patel approached with her medical scanner, requesting permission to perform basic health scans for diplomatic records. The shadow beings agreed, but when she activated her equipment, the results made no sense. The scanner showed energy readings one moment, and nothing at all the next. "Very interesting," Dr. Patel muttered, while checking her equipment. "Your biology appears to be quite different from anything in our database. Exist in ways that your science may not yet understand," the shadow replied. "We are beings of pure consciousness given form, through will, alone." Kale noticed that wherever the shadow beings moved, electronic equipment began functioning strangely. Security cameras flickered, communications devices produced static, and even the lights developed an irregular pulse. The effects seemed to spread outward from the visitors, like ripples in water. Captain Rodriguez had joined the meeting after securing her cargo ship. She asked questions about trade opportunities and what goods the Void Hegemony might want to exchange. The shadows gave vague answers about energy sources and biological samples that made everyone in the room uncomfortable. During the conversation, Kale observed something that terrified him. Several of the security officers who had been standing near the shadow beings now had blank expressions on their faces. Their eyes showed no emotion, and they moved with mechanical precision. When adjusting their positions, he wanted to warn someone, but how could he interrupt a diplomatic meeting as just a delivery worker? His presence was barely tolerated, and speaking out would probably get him thrown out of the room. The situation grew worse. When one of the shadow beings asked for a tour of the station, Commander Torres agreed, thinking it was a normal diplomatic courtesy. But Kale watched in horror as more crew members developed that same blank expression after coming too close. To the visitors, the tour group moved through the station with Kale following at a distance, pretending to deliver supplies. In the engineering section, Vera showed them the quantum reactors that powered the station. The shadow beings seemed very interested in the energy systems and asked detailed technical questions. As they spoke, Kale saw Vera sway slightly on her feet. Her crystalline body, which normally glowed with internal light, began to dim when she answered the next question. Her voice sounded flat and emotionless, like she was reading from a script. In the medical bay, Dr. Patel demonstrated some of her research equipment while explaining how the station handled medical emergencies for different species. But after shaking hands with one of the shadow beings in what seemed like a friendly gesture, her warm smile faded and her eyes became distant. A pattern continued throughout the tour. Security officers, communications technicians, engineering staff, and medical personnel all began showing the same symptoms after direct contact with the visitors within 2 hours. Nearly a quarter of the senior staff had been affected. Kale tried to approach Commander Torres during a brief break, but she was surrounded by affected officers who insisted everything was proceeding normally. When he attempted to point out the changes in their behavior, they looked at him with those same blank expressions and suggested he return to his duties. The crisis began when the shadow beings revealed their true nature. During a private meeting with the command staff, Kale was delivering data crystals to the conference room when he heard Commander Torres scream. He rushed inside to find the 3 shadow beings had grown larger and darker, while streams of glowing energy flowed from the human and alien officers into their bodies. The affected crew members stood motionless as their life force was drained. "Away, you have served your purpose," the shadows said in voices that now sounded like multiple people speaking at once. "This station will become our gateway to the populated regions of your galaxy." Commander Torres tried to activate the emergency alert, but her hands were shaking too badly to work the controls. Kale could see her fighting against some invisible force that was slowly taking control of her mind and body. Security teams rushed into the room, but their weapons passed harmlessly through the shadow beings. Energy blasts and projectiles had no effect on creatures that seemed to exist partially outside normal space. The shadows laughed as more officers fell under their controls. Ara arrived with her best fighters, including several Alverian warriors known for their combat skills, but even her forearms and superior strength meant nothing against enemies that could not be touched. Her blue skin turned pale as the shadows drained her energy and turned her into another mindless servant. The infection spread through the station like a plague. Crew members who came in contact with the affected personnel quickly joined their ranks. Within hours, thousands of people had been converted into hollow servants of the Evoid hegemonic. Hale ran through corridors filled with his former colleagues, who now moved with eerie coordination. Their blank faces showed no recognition when they looked at him, and they spoke in unison when giving orders to unconverted crew members. In the communications center, Nyx sat at her station, sending false messages to approaching ships. Her telepathic abilities had been corrupted to serve the shadow beings, and she used them to lure more victims to the station. Dr. Patel worked in the medical bay, but instead of treating patients, she was preparing some kind of conversion process that would speed up the transformation of remaining crew members. Her gentle hands now moved with cold efficiency as she assembled strange devices. Captain Rodriguez tried to escape to her ship, but found it surrounded by converted security forces. The docking bay doors had been sealed, and all external communications were jammed. Nobody could leave, and nobody could call for help. By the end of the day, only a few hundred unconverted crew members remained hidden in the lower sections of the station, but the shadow beings could sense their locations and were systematically hunting them. Downcale found himself alone in a cargo bay, surrounded by containers of supplies that would never be delivered. The station that had been his home for 3 years was now a tomb filled with the walking dead and creatures of living darkness. He could hear the shadows approaching, their voices echoing through the corridors as they called for the remaining survivors to surrender. The conversion process would be easier if they cooperated, but resistance only delayed the inevitable. As the cargo bay doors began to open, Cale made a decision that would change everything. He had kept his true nature secret for 3 years, letting everyone believe he was just another ordinary elf, but ordinary elves did not possess the ability to restart time from fixed points in the past. Shadow beings flowed into the cargo bay, their glowing eyes fixed on him. "Join us willingly, and your death will be quick and painless," they said in their multi-layered voices. Cale stood his ground as they surrounded him. Instead of running or begging for mercy, he smiled. They had made one critical mistake in their conquest of the station. They did not know that some deaths were not permanent. The shadow beings reached out with tendrils of pure darkness, and Cale felt his life force being pulled from his body. The sensation was like drowning in ice water, while every cell in his body screamed in agony. His elven heritage gave him slightly more resistance than humans, but not enough to survive. The last of his energy drained away, and darkness took him. Cale focused on the one ability he had never revealed to anyone, the power to anchor his consciousness to a fixed point in time and return there upon death. It was not magic in the traditional sense, but something deeper rooted in the very nature of temporal float. The world dissolved into nothingness. Then suddenly Cale was standing in his quarters 24 hours earlier, holding the same delivery schedule he had reviewed the morning before. The reset had worked, but the memory of being drained by shadow creatures remained vivid and terrifying. He looked at his hands, expecting to see some sign of what had happened, but his body was exactly as it had been the day before. The temporal reset was complete, but his knowledge of future events remained intact. This time he would be ready. Cale rushed to the command center, carrying the urgent package for Commander Torres, but when he tried to warn her about the incoming threat, she looked at him like he had lost his mind. "Commander, there is something you need to know about the diplomatic vessel that will arrive tomorrow. The beings calling themselves the Void Hegemony are not what they seem." Torres frowned at him. "How do you know about classified diplomatic communications?" "I cannot explain how. I know, but they are dangerous energy parasites that will try to take over the station. You need to refuse them docking permission." The commander studied his face for a long moment. "Young man, you are clearly under stress. Perhaps you should report to the medical bay for evaluation." Cale realized that without proof, his warnings sounded like the paranoid delusions of an overworked delivery worker. He tried a different approach, focusing on the technical anomalies he had observed. "Commander, yesterday there were unusual energy readings in Section 7 and power fluctuations throughout the station. These are early warning signs of what is coming." Torres checked her computer. Section 7 shows normal readings across all systems. If you are experiencing stress from your duties, we can arrange for canceling. Every attempt to convince her failed. Commander Torres was a practical military officer who dealt in facts and evidence, not the impossible claims of a delivery worker who somehow knew about classified information. KLTRIED, warning other department heads, but received similar responses. Dr. Patel listened politely before suggesting he might be having some kind of breakdown. Zara questioned how he knew about the diplomatic mission, and Vera pointed out that all station systems were functioning normally. The only person who seemed to take him seriously was Nix. When he approached her in the communications center, she looked at him with those large violet eyes and tilted her head. "Thoughtfully, you seem different today, Cale," she said in her musical voice. "Your thoughts feel strange, like they are echoing from somewhere." "L-scan, you read my mind?" Cale asked. "Hopefully not exactly, but I can sense emotional resonance, and yours is very unusual. You feel like someone who has experienced terrible trauma, but I see no signs of physical injury. That is because the trauma has not happened yet, at least not in this timeline." Nick studied him carefully. I am not sure what you mean by timeline, but I believe you are genuinely frightened about something. Will you tell me what you think is going to happen? Kale explained everything. He could remember about the shadow beings, and how they had converted the station crew into mindless servants. Nyx listened without interrupting her telepathic senses, apparently detecting the truth in his emotions. This sounds very dangerous, she said when he finished. If even half of what you say is true, we need to prepare defenses. But how can we convince anyone else without proof? We cannot, Nyx replied, but we can make subtle preparations if you are right. The early warning signs you mentioned will appear again. They spent the rest of the day implementing small changes that might help. Nyx adjusted communication protocols to include automatic warnings if large numbers of crew members stopped responding. Kale memorized the locations of emergency equipment and planned escape routes through the station. When the diplomatic vessel arrived the next morning, it looked exactly as Kale remembered, a ship that seemed to absorb light with an otherworldly grace that made his skin crawl. The shadow beings disembarked and began their diplomatic performance. This time, Kale watched more carefully from hidden positions around the station. The pattern unfolded exactly as before. Electronic equipment malfunctioned when the shadows passed by. Crew members developed blank expressions after contact, and the temperature dropped in every room they visited. Armed with advanced knowledge, Kale tried sabotage. He attempted to damage the docking clamps to prevent the ship from landing, but the engineering controls required access codes he did not have. He tried triggering false fire alarms to evacuate key personnel, but the safety systems required authorization from command staff. Every action he took was limited by his low security clearance and lack of technical training. As a delivery worker, he could go almost anywhere on the station, but he could not access critical systems or override safety protocols. The shadow beings began their conquest exactly as before. Commander Torres screamed. When they revealed their true nature, security teams fired useless weapons at incorporeal enemies. Dr. Patel fell under their control after direct contact, and Zara fought bravely before being converted. But this time Kale noticed details he had missed. Before, the shadows seemed to feed on specific types of energy, particularly from highly emotional or stressed individuals. They also appeared vulnerable to certain frequencies of light, becoming slightly less solid when exposed to specific wavelengths. The engineering section, he watched Vera try to overload the power grid in a desperate attempt to stop the creatures. The surge of energy caused them to flicker and retreat momentarily before adapting to the new conditions. The conversion process was not instant either. It took several minutes of contact to fully drain a person and turn them into a servant. Knowing this, Kale managed to rescue a few crew members by interrupting the process, but he could not save enough people to make a difference. The outcome was the same: thousands dead or converted. The station under shadow control, and Kale alone in the cargo bay, facing his second death. But he had learned valuable information about their weaknesses. The shadows drained his life force again. Kale focused on his discoveries. They could be disrupted by energy overloads and specific light frequencies. They needed time to complete conversions, and they seemed to have difficulty maintaining their form when exposed to certain types of electromagnetic radiation. Most importantly, he realized that his elven heritage gave him natural resistance to their consciousness-draining abilities. He had lasted longer than anyone else in direct contact with the creatures, which meant he might be able to resist them completely with proper preparation. The darkness took him again, and once more, Kale found himself standing in his quarters 24 hours before the disaster. He was becoming an expert on dying, but now he had the knowledge needed to fight back. The third attempt would be different. He would not try to convince skeptical authority figures. Instead, he would focus on building a resistance network using the people who might believe him, starting with those who had natural talents that could detect or resist the shadow beings. Nyx, with her telepathic abilities, could sense the truth in his emotions. Vera, with her technical expertise, could modify station systems to create defensive measures. Dr. Patel, with her medical knowledge, could develop treatments or protections, and Zara, with her combat training, could organize effective resistance. But first, he needed to prove his credibility in ways that could not be dismissed or explained away. The challenge was building trust with people who barely knew him while preparing for an enemy that defied conventional understanding. Kale began planning his approach carefully. This time he would not be a lone voice, crying warnings in the wilderness. He would build a team of believers, ready to face the impossible and fight for the survival of everyone on Nexus Station Harmony. The shadow beings had won twice through surprise and superior abilities, but they had never faced an enemy who could learn from failure and try again, armed with knowledge of their weaknesses and the determination to protect his friends. Kale prepared for the most important day of his life or lives, as the case might be. Kale started his third timeline with a completely different strategy. Instead of trying to convince authority figures, he would focus on the individuals who had shown the most resistance to shadow influence in previous cycles. He began with Zara. During her off-duty hours, when she trained alone in the security gym, the Alvirian warrior was practicing combat forms with all four arms, moving in complex patterns that would confuse most opponents. Kale watched from the doorway until she noticed him and stopped her routine. "You need something, delivery boy?" she asked without hostility, but clearly wondering why he was there. "My name is Kale, and I need to show you something that will sound impossible." He stepped into the training area. "I know. You fight with the Kandorian blade style that your mother taught you before she died in the border wars with the Helix Confederations." Zara froze completely. "How could you possibly know that?" "Because in 18 hours you will die fighting shadow beings from dark space, unless we prepare defenses now." Kale met her eyes steadily. "You will fight better than anyone else on this station, but your weapons will pass through them like they are made of mists. That is impossible. Nobody knows about my mother or my training. She died when I was 12 years old, and I never told anyone on this station about her," Kale continued. "I also know you have a scar on your left shoulder from when you fell off the training platforms as a child, and that you keep her blade hidden in your quarters, even though regulations forbid personal weapons." Zara backed away from him. "Who are you really? What do you want?" "I am exactly who I appear to be, but I have lived through the next day twice already." Kale pulled out a small datapad. "I can prove it by predicting events that have not happened yet. At 14:30 today, Captain Rodriguez will receive a priority message redirecting her cargo shipment. At 1600, Commander Torres will hold an emergency briefing about a diplomatic vessel from an unknown group called the Void Hegemony." "How do you know these things?" "Because I have experienced them before. When everyone on this station dies tomorrow, I will wake up today again with all my memories intact. It is an ability I have never told anyone about." Zara studied his face carefully. Her security training included reading people for deception, and whatever she saw convinced her to listen. The predictions he made came true, exactly as he said. Commander Torres did hold an emergency briefing, and the mysterious diplomatic vessel was indeed scheduled to arrive by evening. Zara was starting to believe his impossible story, especially when he demonstrated knowledge of security protocols and personnel files that a delivery worker should never have access to. Next, Kale approached Nyx in the communications center during a quiet period between shifts. The Syrian looked up from her consoles with those large violet eyes that seemed to see more than they. "Should you feel different again today?" she said before he could speak. "Yesterday, your emotional resonance was strange, but today it feels like you are carrying the weight of terrible knowledge." "That is exactly what I am carrying," Kale replied. "Can you scan my memories directly?" Nyx hesitated. "Deep telepathic contact with Nan Syrians can be dangerous for both parties, and it is forbidden by station regulations. These are not normal circumstances. I need you to see what I have experienced so you will believe what I have to tell you." Against her better judgment, Nyx reached out with her mind and touched his consciousness. What she found there made her gasp and pull back immediately. "Your memories contain impossible things, events that feel completely real but show people dying and being reborn. Those events are real in the timelines I have lived through. Tomorrow shadow beings will arrive claiming to be diplomats. They will convert everyone on this station into mindless servants unless we stop them. Nick stared at him in shock. The emotional resonance of your memories is too strong to be fabricated. But what you are describing violates everything we know about the nature of time and death. Kale spent the next hour explaining his temporal abilities and what he had learned about the shadow beings. Nix used her telepathic gifts to verify the truth of his experiences and gradually became convinced that his incredible story was real. With Zara and Nix as allies, Kale approached Vera. In the engineering section, the Quartzian was performing routine maintenance on the quantum reactors, her crystalline body reflecting the blue energy that powered the station. Vera, I need your help modifying the station power grid to emit specific light frequencies that can disrupt energy-based life forms. The engineer turned toward him, her faceted features catching the reactor light. Why would you need to do such a thing? Because tomorrow we will be invaded by creatures made of living shadow that can drain the life force from organic beings. Standard weapons cannot harm them, but I believe they are vulnerable to certain electromagnetic frequencies. Vera processed this information with typical Quartzian logic. What evidence do you have for these claims? Kale explained his temporal resets and previous experiences, while Nix provided telepathic confirmation that he was telling the truth. Vera found the concept of time manipulation fascinating from an engineering perspective and agreed to help design defensive systems together. They worked through the night, modifying power conduits and installing emergency overrides that could flood specific areas with disruptive energy. Dr. Patel joined them after Kale proved his knowledge of her research by accurately describing experiments she had not yet performed. The medical officer was initially skeptical, but became convinced when he demonstrated detailed knowledge of her personal medical history and ongoing projects. She began developing protective treatments based on his descriptions of how the shadow beings affected different species. Captain Rodriguez was the hardest to convince because she was naturally suspicious of anyone who knew too much about her cargo manifests and flight schedules. But when Kale warned her about a mechanical problem that would develop in her ship engines, she started taking him seriously. The team worked frantically to prepare defenses while trying to avoid attracting attention from Commander Torres and other senior staff who would never believe their story. Zara positioned loyal security teams in strategic locations. Nix prepared communication protocols for coordinating resistance, and Vera installed her frequency generators throughout the station. Dr. Patel synthesized protective compounds based on Kale analysis of shadow beam effects, while Captain Rodriguez prepared her ship as a mobile weapons platform equipped with modified energy weapons that might be effective against incorporeal enemies. When the diplomatic vessel arrived, it looked exactly as Kale remembered, but this time they were ready. The shadow beings went through their diplomatic performance, but hidden sensors detected their energy signatures and confirmed everything. Kale had predicted the crisis began when the shadows revealed their true nature in the conference room, but instead of helpless victims, they faced prepared resistance. Vera activated her frequency generators, filling the station with disruptive electromagnetic radiation that made the shadow beings flicker and lose cohesions. Zara led security teams, equipped with modified weapons that could actually harm the creatures, while Dr. Patel administered protective treatments that slowed the conversion process. Nix coordinated the defense through telepathic links that the shadows could not intercept. For the first time, the shadow beings faced real opposition. Their usual tactics of surprise and overwhelming force failed against defenders who knew exactly what to expect. The battle raged through the station corridors as both sides fought for control, but just as victory seemed possible, the shadows revealed a terrible truth. The delegation was not an invasion force, but merely scouts for a much larger fleet. Thousands of shadow vessels were approaching through dark space, intending to use Nexus Station as a gateway for conquering populated space. The real invasion had not even begun yet. Kale watched in horror as the main shadow fleet emerged from the void around the station. Their ships blotted out the stars, and their combined presence created energy distortions that threatened to tear the station apart. Even with all their preparations, the Resistance could not hope to fight an entire fleet. Shadow Scouts began adapting to their defensive measures, learning to resist the frequency generators, and developing immunity to Dr. Patel. Protective treatments, they had their own temporal awareness, and were using knowledge gained from this encounter. To modify their approach, the station defenses collapsed under the assault of the main fleet. Kale realized that stopping the scouts was not enough. They needed to prevent the entire invasion, and that would require a solution beyond conventional. Resistance. The shadows closed in on the surviving defenders, who had fought bravely but could not overcome such overwhelming numbers as Kale. Faced his fourth death, he understood that victory would require a sacrifice greater than anything he had imagined, but he also knew something the shadow beings did not. His temporal abilities were growing stronger with each reset, and he was beginning to understand their true nature. They were not just a way to cheat death, but a fundamental connection to the flow of time itself. The darkness took him once more, but this time Kale was ready to attempt something that had never been tried before. Instead of simply resetting time, he would try to trap the shadow beings in a temporal loop that would prevent them from ever reaching the populated galaxy. The fifth and final timeline would determine the fate of countless worlds. The fifth timeline began differently than the others. Kale could feel his temporal abilities growing stronger with each reset, as if the repeated exposure to death and rebirth was unlocking deeper levels of his elven heritage. He realized he could do more than just retain memories across timelines. He could share them, starting with Nyx. Kale reached out with his enhanced abilities and transferred complete memories of all previous timelines directly into her mind. The Syrian gasped as 4 cycles worth of experiences flooded her consciousness, but her telepathic training helped her process the impossible information. Now you understand everything I have been through, he said as she recovered from the memory transfer. Nyx stared at him with new respect and terror. Your abilities are far beyond anything I imagined. Even among my people, such power over time and memory is considered mythical. Together, they approached the others, and Nyx used her telepathic gifts to verify the transferred memories as genuine. Zara accepted the knowledge with warrior pragmatism, while Vera found the temporal mechanics fascinating. Dr. Patel was amazed by the medical implications, and Captain Rodriguez focused on tactical applications for the first time. Kale had a team that fully understood the threat they faced and possessed complete knowledge of shadow being capabilities, weaknesses, and tactics. They could plan from the beginning instead of reacting to disasters. Vera worked on advanced frequency generators that could create standing waves of disruptive energy throughout the station. Dr. Patel developed more effective protective treatments, and even began working on offensive biological weapons that might harm energy-based lifeforms. Zara organized her security forces with detailed knowledge of shadow tactics, while Captain Rodriguez modified her ship with weapons specifically designed to fight incorporeal enemies. Nyx established telepathic networks that could coordinate defense efforts across the entire station. But Kale knew even their improved preparations would not be enough to stop the main shadow fleet. He needed a permanent solution that would eliminate the threat forever. The answer came when he realized his temporal abilities were not limited to personal resets. If he could anchor himself to a specific point in time, he might be able to create a larger temporal effect that could trap the shadow beings in an endless cycle. The shadow vessel arrived as expected, and the diplomatic performance began. But this time, when the creatures revealed their true nature, they faced defenders who knew exactly how to fight them. The modified frequency generators created energy fields that disrupted their molecular cohesion, while improved weapons actually inflicted damage. Patel protective treatments proved much more effective, allowing crew members to resist conversion for extended periods. The coordinated defense held the shadows at bay, while evacuation procedures moved non-essential personnel to protected areas. But as before, the main fleet emerged from dark space, bringing thousands of shadow vessels that dwarfed the station. The energy distortions from so many creatures threatened to tear reality itself apart and conventional defenses became useless against such overwhelming force. This is when Kale revealed his final plan to his allies. I can create a temporal loop around the entire station that will trap the shadow beings in an endless cycle, where their invasion fails repeatedly, but it requires me to anchor the effect with my own life force. You mean you would die permanently? Nyx asked with horror. Not exactly. I would become part of the temporal flow itself, existing outside normal time. To maintain the loop, the shadow beings would be trapped, but so would I. There has to be another way. Zara protested. Your sacrifice would save us, but at too high a cost. Kale smiled sadly. It is the only way to protect not just this station, but the entire galaxy. The shadows came here because this is a major trading hub. If they control Nexus Station, they can spread to every populated world. Dr. Patel checked her medical readings as the shadow fleet approached. The energy distortions are already affecting station systems. We have perhaps 10 minutes before they overwhelm. Our defenses. Scale began the process of anchoring his consciousness to the temporal flow around the station. It required him to spread his life force across multiple points in time, creating a network of energy that could sustain a permanent loop. The shadows reached the station and began their assault, but as they breached the outer defenses, Kale activated his temporal trap. Reality twisted and folded as time itself became a weapon against the invaders. The shadow beings found themselves caught in an endless cycle where their victory always turned to defeat. They would conquer the station, only to have time reset to the moment before their arrival, forcing them to experience failure repeatedly, without understanding why. The main fleet tried to retreat, but discovered they could not leave the area around the station. The temporal effect held them in place. Like insects trapped in amber, they were not destroyed, but they could never escape to threaten other worlds. Kale felt his consciousness spreading across the time stream as he became the living anchor that maintained the trap. His physical body remained on the station, but part of him now existed in every moment of the loop simultaneously. The immediate crisis was over, but the cost was enormous. Kale could still interact with his friends on the station, but he knew he would never be able to leave his post as temporal guardian. The shadow threat was contained, but only as long as he maintained the eternal vigil. Commander Torres finally learned the truth about what had happened when the evidence became impossible to ignore. Her initial disbelief turned to gratitude when she understood how close they had come to galactic catastrophe. Saved everyone, she said, when she visited Kale in his new role as temporal security advisor. I am sorry we did not listen to your warnings. Sooner. Kale accepted her apology gracefully. The important thing is that the threat is contained, and we learned valuable lessons about taking seriously the observations of all crew members. Regardless of their apparent status, the station became a model for interspecies cooperation. As news of the shadow threat spread throughout the galaxy, Sarah was promoted to head of galactic security, while Dr. Patel led research into energy-based life forms. Nyx became the chief of interstellar communications, and Vera designed new defensive systems for other stations. Captain Rodriguez established a new shipping company that specialized in rapid response to potential threats. Using the tactical knowledge gained from fighting the shadows, her vessels became the first line of defense for isolated colonies and trading posts. The shadow beings remained trapped in their temporal prison, experiencing endless cycles of defeat, while Kale watched over them from his position outside normal time. He could communicate with his friends, and even help with station operations, but his true existence was now spread across multiple temporal dimensions. Years passed, and Nexus Station Harmony became known throughout the galaxy as the place where an ordinary delivery worker saved countless worlds from destruction. The story inspired others to pay attention to overlooked individuals who might possess hidden wisdom or abilities. Kale found peace in his new existence, even though it meant sacrificing his normal life. The knowledge that billions of beings across the galaxy could live safely because of his choice made the eternal vigil worthwhile. His friends visited him regularly, and he remained an active part of station life, despite his unique circumstances. The temporal loop continued to function perfectly, keeping The shadow threat contained while allowing normal operations to proceed. The station flourished as a center of trade and diplomacy with improved security protocols that took seriously even the smallest concerns raised by any crew member and the invisible delivery worker had become the most important person on the station. Not through seeking glory or recognition, but through understanding that sometimes the greatest heroism requires the ultimate sacrifice. The shadows would never escape their prison, and the galaxy would never forget the elf who gave everything to protect them. Kale watched over Nexus Station Harmony from his position outside time, knowing that his vigil would continue for as long as the threat remained. But he was not alone in his watch. His friends and colleagues had become his extended family, and the station itself had become a symbol of hope that ordinary people could achieve extraordinary things when they worked together. The story of the delivery boy who restarted the station would be told for generations, inspiring others to look beyond surface appearances and recognize the potential for heroism in everyone. The galaxy was safer because one person chose to act when others could not see. The danger and his sacrifice ensured that such threats would be met with preparedness rather than surprise in the future.